Welcome to Life Picks Relationships, helping you understand and enliven your marriage through the various perspectives and experiences of others who found a way to prioritize what's really important in life. From new love to those that have weathered the storms, let's get ready to take your relationships to the next level with your host, ST.
Hey, Life Picksters! Hope you're having an awesome day. Are you ready to understand your marriage even better today? While you're listening to this episode, if there's a point that you like, if there's a sentence, a tip, a new perspective, something that you haven't thought of before, and you think that there's going to be somebody else who's going to really go and benefit from it too, I am asking you, or I am telling you to go and share it with that other person. It's going to make you feel better. It's going to really go and help the other person and support the other person. And it's going to help us reach our goal of getting 1 million downloads per episode. So many good things from it. So just why not? Now for today's episode, I'm really excited. We have someone who has a bit of a different story, someone who went through some crazy challenges, but not just like the typical of like, oh, they didn't have money or like they were fighting tons or stuff like that. Something that I really, really hope doesn't happen to any of you. I'm going to let her tell you the story, but she is a writer and she wrote a book about it. You can go and find out more about her at mayahayesauthor.com or on Instagram at mayahayesauthor. I'm going to put her links in the show notes so you can go and find her. Thank you so much, Maya, for being here. I am super excited to be speaking with you. You want to start by telling us how you met your husband?
Yes. So actually, he was my intern, so to speak. We were both working for a U.S. Senator in San Francisco. He was a summer intern. I was a summer intern, but we were on different days. And then a staff position opened up and I got the job and he did not. We both applied for it. And then I started working every day of the week and we met. And the first day that we met, our desks were sitting face to face and he had those big old desktop monitor things.
Yeah.
Kind of leaning around and talking to each other. And we went out to lunch. I don't know. Like we went out to lunch that day. I found out that he wasn't as old as I thought he was. I thought he was at least 21, but he was 20. Because I wanted to order beers at lunch and he wasn't old enough to drink.
How old were you?
I was 21.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't like you had like a 7-year age gap or something.
No. But he looked older because he had like a 5 o'clock shadow. I mean, he just looked like he could have been, I don't know, 25, right? So I thought he was like an older guy. And then I had a boyfriend at the time of 3 years, but then, I went home that day and I told my mom that I met the person I was going to marry. And then we got engaged 6 weeks later. Yeah, that day. And we got engaged 6 weeks later.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Did he also feel that like from the first date? Like,
no, yeah. I mean, like we just knew.
What was about it that you think you just like knew?
He was always like super supportive. Like I was putting myself through school. And I, was working full time and going to school full time. And he didn't make me feel ashamed for that because the group that I ran and like everybody's parents could afford to send them to college. And he was like, wow, that's really great. I mean, his parents were sending him to college, but he was really respectful. And he's like, what do you want to achieve with your life? What do you want to do this? And so like, we were talking about goals and things and he was super supportive. He was really easy to talk to. And he just made me laugh like crazy. And I was just like, this is a good person. And my boyfriend of 3 years was terrible. So it was like refreshing.
Yeah, like sometimes we stay in this bad relationship just because like we can't get out of it. It's like easier to just stay in what we know than what we don't know. But you got lucky, right. You got like saved like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So how many years are you married for now?
We got married in 98. So it'll be 23 years this year.
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's like take us back. I know like your relationship had a whole bit of a history. Let's start like all the way in the beginning. What was it like right when you got married? How was your relationship then?
It was really interesting because he's an only child and it could have been really bad or really good, but his parents really embraced me. And my parents really embraced him. And so it was like these two families actually marrying each other and super supportive. I don't know, like we traveled a lot. Like in the beginning, we traveled all the time. We got married in between my junior and senior year of college. He graduated early. So he came home from school, moved in with me, and then we got married the following August. So we had known each other for a year before we got married, but we got engaged after 6 weeks. And then yeah, we just traveled, and then I graduated and he started law school. And so our plan was to have kids when he graduated from law school, but that didn't really work out. So we had two of our kids while he was in law school. So those early years, like my oldest son was born right after our third anniversary. So those first couple of years were really like parenting, babies, law school. I mean, there was just
night.
a
You
lot
and the
going
kids,
on.
him was studying.
Yeah. And he worked full time. So he went to work. We lived in San Francisco. He'd work all day in San Francisco. Then he would drive down to Silicon Valley for like 45 minutes and go to law school in the evenings. And then he would come home, do it all over again, 5 days a week. And then on the weekends, he just studied like crazy.
Crazy life.
It was a
Were you like
grind.
glad when that was just all finished?
Yes. And then he didn't practice law.
What?
So, and then he didn't go into law. So
He didn't go into law. So what does he do? What did he do?
he actually works in the legal field, but he's not an attorney.
Okay. So like it helped him in some way to like get that job and get in there.
Yeah.
Probably,
Yeah.
right? Now, what would you suggest to someone who is right now in that challenging state of being in school, having family responsibilities, and having to work all at the same time? How could they go and make things a little bit easier and just better for the relationship? I
think like for us, we had a lot of family support. My in-laws actually lived next door to us. Again, one of those things that could go really bad or really good.
I'm like,
it went great.
Yeah.
My in-laws helped tremendously with the kids, but also we knew that this was a short-term plan, right? We knew that it was a limited amount of time. And then once we got through it, things would be different. So, for 3 years, it was horrible. Like, he was gone all the time. I was with the kids. I stayed home with the kids. It was just, he wasn't around a lot, which is part of the reason why he decided not to practice law, because if he'd gone into a big law firm, he would have been on the grind still. So as a family, we made the decision that he would not practice so that he could have more family time. But for us, it was always everything that we were doing, all the sacrifices that we were making for the long term for the family.
Yeah. So you're like, okay, now it's challenging, 2 years, 3 years, however long it is, but like, we'll get through this. Life will be better afterwards. It's worth it. Like, you're thinking what's going to be after that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, what happened afterwards when your husband got in that accident?
Yeah. So we had been married for 12 years at that point. He was driving to work one day on his Vespa, and we lived in San Francisco, and he was hit by a truck making an illegal left-hand turn, dragged him. And, he ended up having to go to the hospital. I didn't know where he was for several hours. A bystander picked up his phone, called me, said that he had been hit, but nobody could tell me where he had been. And his mom and I called like every single hospital. Nobody had a record of him. And then finally, an ambulance operator told me that he would have been taken to General Hospital because he was a trauma. So I started driving down there. And as I was driving, I got a phone call from the hospital saying that he had been admitted, but they couldn't give me his condition. I had to come and speak directly to the doctor. So my thought was he was dead. But when I got there, he actually wasn't dead.
Now before you continues through, what was that like, that feeling that driving, you're like, I think my husband's dead. And it's not like he was sick and I see this coming. It's literally the whole not knowing where he is, the whole buildup of emotion. And then okay, maybe he's dead.
Yeah, no, it was intense. Actually in my book, I spent a lot of time talking about that because it was a very pivotal moment in our relationship. And I had this whole thing of not only losing my have just lost my best friend, but my children have just lost their father. And I don't know who I am outside of this relationship. This has been my whole adult life, basically, has been being married to this person, part of this. It was terrifying. But also I think I was in a state of shock because I wasn't letting myself, I felt disconnected from my body as I was driving. And as I had to stand in the line to wait to talk to the receptionist so that I could check in to let the doctor know that I was there. And as I'm waiting in the line, they're processing all the people before me. And I think, okay, I should call his work today and tell them that he won't be in. And so I couldn't think of anybody's name. I couldn't think of his boss name, but I could remember that the chairman of his company had an assistant. And I remembered her name because I had met her a few times. So I called the company and I asked for her. And when she got on the phone, I said, he won't be into work today. Can you please let his boss know? And she said, why? What happened? I said, oh, he's been hit by a car. He's probably dead. And she started crying and I was just too numb to feel anything.
Yeah.
So I just stopped, checked in, went and sat down. And then my in-laws showed up at the hospital. And then the doctor came out, asked for me, but My husband and I have different last names. So she was asking for Mrs. I thought she was asking for my mother-in-law. So I just kind of sat there and waited for my mother-in-law, and she had to like kind of push me. So I went in first to see him. And as I'm walking, the doctor is telling me that he's okay, that he's going to be okay. And I wasn't processing how anyone could be run over by a truck and be okay. But I walk in and he's laying on this table covered with a sheet and all these machines around him and stuff. And he's not moving and his eyes are closed and he's kind of gray. I didn't want to go in the room. I couldn't go in the room. And so the doctor went and got my mother-in-law, my father-in-law. They went in. And I just watched as my mother-in-law and my father-in-law helped get him dressed into leftovers from the lost and found. They walked him out to their car. They laid him stomach side down in the back of their sedan.
He was allowed to leave that day?
Oh yeah. They released him within hours. He had broken wrist, dislocated shoulders, road rash down to the skin on his knees, on his elbows. He had, I want to say it was like 60 stitches across from hip to hip where he had gotten hooked under the car because he got hooked stomach side down.
Ouch.
And they said that because he was wearing a helmet, he might have a mild concussion, but we were very blessed that it wasn't more severe because he had protected his head.
So everyone listening, number one, wear a helmet. But with all that he was just able to be released so quickly.
Yeah. So he was hit at about 8:30 in the morning and he was home by about 4. And this is 2 days before Thanksgiving, but it gets better.
Okay.
This is 2 days before Thanksgiving. And Saturday, 2 days after Thanksgiving, we had a 10-day trip to Europe planned for his job. So I was going to go on his business trip with him that year. So 4 days after his trip. On Thanksgiving, he can barely sit up. He's in so much pain. He's like popping pills. He informs everybody that we're going on the trip still. And we went.
You serious?
I'm serious. We went.
How did he manage that?
So we had a videographer with us, and the videographer and I just like carried all the luggage and everything. And he kind of just limped around. I just made sure he took lots of painkillers. He was having a lot of nightmares and flashbacks. And I had convinced myself he was going to go even if I didn't go with him. So I convinced myself that if he was going to be there, the least I could do is go along and make sure he's taking his medicine and helping him.
Your kids were like by someone else, by your parents or something?
They were with his parents.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Because they lived next door. So we did London, Frankfurt, Milan, and Paris in 10 days.
Oh, wow.
And there was a massive,
not in that condition, but
no. And there was a massive snowstorm too, that like ground Europe to a halt. So our flight from Milan to Paris was canceled and they had to put us on a train. And it took about 15 hours on the train to get to Paris because of the snowstorm. And we had to stand the entire way.
No way. Are you serious?
Yeah. And he couldn't sit anyway because of all the stitches.
So he was standing the whole time. How did he fly?
We flew business. So he laid down on his stomach.
Ouch. Okay.
Yeah.
Like I'm just like imagining all that, like,
it's
and
crazy.
You're saying it's a business trip. So he was really able to go and do the work that he needed to do?
No, they were filming. So he was going around and interviewing different people in his company.
Okay.
Or in his firm. So he was traveling around and filming people. The videographer is a good friend of ours. And so he knew that he'd been in an accident and he pulled me aside a couple of times and asked me if my husband was okay. And my response always was, you know how he is, work is good for him, blah, blah, blah. So at that point, we had started to develop what our outward story was going to be to the public, which was everything's okay. We have it under control.
Which really wasn't true.
It wasn't true at all.
Yeah. So he was able to like do those interviews, even though he was like totally
drugged up and in pain. Yeah, he did it.
Okay. So what happened once you got back?
Life seemed to be pretty okay. But over the next couple of months, I'd say starting in January, February of 2011, he started to show signs of PTSD and depression and brain injury. But we didn't know brain injury at the time. But he was angry. His whole personality shifted. And I started to realize his memory was gone. So his short-term memory wasn't working, which I had realized shortly after the accident. He couldn't remember things that I had just said to him or things that were going on with the kids. I didn't realize that he had forgotten a lot of our life before his accident. So he told me one night that he didn't remember marrying me. He didn't remember the kids being born. He knew that he was married to me and he knew that they were our children, but he didn't remember those events. He
How
didn't
did he
know
know? Like, was it because of just like circumstance? He sees he's living in the house with you guys, or was it because of something else?
No, I think he just knew who we were, but he just didn't remember how we got to that point. And so at that point, I started telling him all the stories of our life together. I'd get out pictures and I would show him, do you remember this? Do you remember this? Do you remember this? And he'd have no memory, none. And, and his parents were doing the same thing. And so we were all kind of trying to fill him up with our memories. And he was frustrated because he didn't remember.
Yeah. Like people are saying these stories and he just
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you do with him? Did you take him to like see doctors, therapists? Like how did you deal with that?
So I talked to a woman at our school. She was a psychiatrist, and I asked her for referral because I thought he had some depression. Became very angry with me for that because he felt that I was exposing a secret. He didn't want anyone to know that he was struggling because we had created what I call the miraculous recovery myth. Like we were going around telling everyone, he's great. Look at him. Like he had started running. He dropped about 50 pounds. I mean, he was looking fantastic. So outwardly, he looked really good, but inwardly, he was a chaotic mess. But we kept saying, oh, he was so lucky. He was hit by the truck, but he was wearing his watch. So his wrist was saved and like all these different things. So nobody was really looking, right? People just, I think, want to, when you say something, people want to believe it. They don't want to look below, especially when it's something that could be uncomfortable. Like my husband's suffering from depression and PTSD. Like nobody wants to go there. So it was easier for, I think, people to believe me when I said, oh, it's all good. He's doing so much better. Look, he's running every day and he's healthy. But what kind of tipped me off is with all the medical bills started coming in and they were extensive and we couldn't afford to pay for them. And we had decided at the beginning that we would not sue the person that hit him. He was a 19-year-old boy on a work job. But as the bills came in, we realized that we actually needed to do something. So my husband contacted an attorney without telling me and had talked to her and decided that we were going to sue the boy's individual insurance and his work insurance. And so this took us down a whole different rabbit hole for the next, I think, 18 months.
Okay. Now, before I continue that, yeah. I'm really curious to hear about it. Did you you said he did it by himself. Did you want that? Like now that it happened afterwards, are you happy he did that? Or what are your thoughts?
It was good and bad. So he brought me, after he found the attorney, he brought me to go meet with her so she could walk us through the process. And I wasn't completely sold, like when we were walking out, but he told me that it would be a good thing. I knew that we were having some problems with the medical bills. And I'm like, well, I could get a job. And he was very against me having a job. He said it was fucking embarrassing, to use his words, for me to have a job. So I didn't understand how he kept telling me that we were okay with money and I didn't need to help by getting a job, but yet we needed to sue to pay them. It didn't make sense to me, but I just kind of, okay, if you think this is the right thing to do, I'll follow you wherever you need to go.
Now, was that your perspective and everything in the marriage, or was it just this?
With this, I was so afraid. Like his personality had changed so much. And I had convinced myself if I just love him more and show him more support and more encouragement, and more this, and not I was afraid to push too hard. And I thought that if I pushed back, it was going to make him have an episode, or he would start crying again, or he would shut down. So I just stepped back a lot and let him guide it. But the lawsuit opened up this whole thing of depositions and medical exams. And during those medical exams, we found out that he had a brain injury. And so that was the explanation for some of his behaviors, like his anger, his problems with his memory. He was pushing everybody in his life away. Me, my kids, his parents, like he didn't want any of us around. He would come home from work and lock himself in our bedroom and we wouldn't see him for the rest of the night.
How did you deal with that?
I didn't. I thought I was coping. I was doing my best because I was doing what I thought I needed to do to protect my kids and support my husband. But those two things were on this path of just colliding because my husband was so and before this, he was the most fabulous father ever. And especially to my middle son, Leo, he was incredibly awful. And Leo had kind of been the favorite son before the accident. And he was 6 or 7 when the accident happened, 6 maybe. And my husband the more Leo and I would say that we loved him and we wanted to help him, the more angry he would become with us. So I was trying to walk this fine line between protecting my kids and making sure my husband never blew up at anyone and that he was getting the help that he needed. Yeah. It was awful.
I can't even imagine it. Like, I want to get to how you solved that and dealt with that afterwards. But first, back to the brain injury. What was the brain injury and how did he deal with it?
So he had a traumatic brain injury, kind of similar to football players who have been hit over and over and over again, like repetitive concussions. So it wasn't it wasn't concussion. It was, I guess, like a moderate brain injury where it impacted his memory, his emotions, his personality. He did not like the diagnosis. He felt that it meant that there was something, he was flawed and a bad person. And he just kind of went to worst case scenario.
So how did you give him help with that?
So the lawsuit, actually, they were making him see a bunch of psychiatrists, but he would not tell me who he was seeing. And he told me that he was going, and I would see like bottles of like antidepressants and stuff like that, and then they would disappear. He would not talk to me about any of his medical treatment.
So were you not like really scared that there like might be something dangerous going on here? He is taking his medication. He's not taking it. Like, that's worse, going like fluctuating and not really.
Yeah. But unfortunately, because he's an adult, like I have no right to his medical records. I can't call up his doctors and ask them any questions. They can't give me any information. So I just had to trust that he was doing what he needed to do for the lawsuit.
Okay. And then the lawsuit, like, figured out what happened with that.
Yeah. So the doctors in the lawsuit determined that he had a brain injury and that he had PTSD and that he had depression and all this stuff. But the lawsuit was very draining because every time he'd go and do these tests, he was exhausted for about a day afterward. And he would just like curl up on the bed and cry and say that he should have died. So, I mean, there's this whole theme that was beginning where he just felt that he should be dead. And he would say that over and over again, that he should have been dead. He's a horrible dad. He's a horrible husband and blah, 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 blah. And my heart was breaking. Like, I just wanted to fix him. That's all I wanted, was just to fix him and make him how he was before.
Yeah. Now, how did your kids deal with this?
My kids were lucky, I think, in that they had grandma and grandpa right there too. So they spent a lot of time with my in-laws so that I could spend a lot of time with my husband.
Okay. Now I know that at some point you ran away to Paris. Where did that come in?
So about a year after my husband's accident, he started having an affair with a woman, a contractor that worked at his company. And it went on for about 9 months. And I found out about it in June. And when I found out about it, I found out at 5 o'clock in the morning. His phone was ringing by the side of the bed. I picked it up, went into the bathroom. I had kind of got suspicious over the previous 2 weeks, and he had changed his password on his phone, which was something he had never done. The day before, I'd given my youngest son was 5, and he had my husband's phone. My husband used to play like this little pirate game on his phone, and it had locked. And I watched as my husband typed in the new password. So I had his phone. I typed in the password. It was in the bathroom. And it was just like all these messages from his girlfriend, I guess. Where are you? Why haven't you called me? What's going on? Is everything okay? I miss you. I love you. Blah, 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 blah. I was like, what the fuck? Like, here I am running around for a year and a half, like trying to make sure that you're doing okay. And I was stunned. So I went into the bedroom. I woke him up. I like threw his phone across the room and broke it and started yelling at him. And he was like, it only happened 3 times. It was an accident. We've been drinking, blah, 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 blah. Like, all the normal excuses that guys will say. So I told him, like, go downstairs and tell your mom and your dad what you've done. I'm like, and just go tell them right now. Go tell them what an idiot you are. Go tell them. So he went downstairs. His dad had gone to work already. And he told his mom what he had done. And then he came back up. I'm like, it was the beginning of summer vacation for the kids. I'm like, get them ready, take them to camp and go to work. And he had a therapy appointment that morning. I'm like, go to work, go to therapy. I don't care. I don't want to see you. And we literally had just settled our lawsuit a week before. So we had all this money from the lawsuit. And while he went out doing whatever he was doing, he kept like texting me, can I come home? And I'm like, no, don't come home. I bought a ticket to Paris. I found an apartment and then I left that night. So you
left with your kids or you left by yourself?
By myself. So I arranged for my kids to fly to my parents' house in Michigan. So my mother-in-law was going to go with them, drop them off in Michigan, and they were going to stay. I bought a ticket for a month to go to Paris just so I could have some time by myself and figure out what was going on. And my kids were going to stay with my parents for a month. And so I left that night, and he like took me to the airport, and he was crying. He was like, "You don't have to go."
He took you to the airport.
He took me to the airport, and, I didn't eat anything. That I was so upset. Like I couldn't eat, like my appetite was gone. I was feeling frantic. I called my doctor before I left, and I told her what had happened. And I said, "I'm going to France. I can't, like my brain is just racing and I'm anxious and I feel terrible." And so she gave me a prescription for lorazepam to like just help me sleep and calm down. And then I went to Paris, and I just showed up, and I had friends who lived there. So it was like a safe place for me to go because I knew people. And I showed up, and I just kind of did my thing. And then.
And what was that like? You're in Paris, like your husband's back at home. I don't know, like if you thought of maybe divorcing him, like what were your thoughts going through your brain at that point?
So I wanted him to sit in my house without my kids, without me, without anything, and just think.
So you did this like to punish him?
Yes. Yes. I wanted him to think about what he had done and everything that he was on the verge of losing. And I wanted him to really like reflect on it. What ended up happening is he actually went with my boys to Michigan. He went to go stay at my parents' house, and he told my parents what he had done. And then he stayed in my parents' house.
And while you're there, I'm like, okay. So it's really interesting because in some ways, he looks very normal. He's doing some really normal, what regular people do. And at the same time, he has his brain injury. I hope he's like getting help for it, like during this past time, trying to go and figure like things out. He had this affair. His wife's in Paris. It's like not a typical situation to just go and be in.
Yeah. Yeah. So my parents told him that if he wanted to fix things with me, he needed to fly to Paris and try to fix things with. So he left my boys in Michigan. About 10 days later, he showed up in Paris.
Were you like really mad?
I was still, I think, in shock a little bit because this is not something that I ever thought was even in the realm of possibility for him. And all the fair behavior that he had exhibited over the previous months, I was marking up to PTSD, depression, and brain injury. I was explaining away the inconsistencies in his stories, his increase in work travel, like all that, because the woman that he was having an affair with actually lived in New York. So he was flying back and forth to New York a lot. I thought he was just super busy at work. So he showed up, and I was still in shock. I didn't know if I wanted to see him, but there was like this weird part of me that wanted nothing more than to see him. Like I was angry. I was sad. I was scared. I didn't know what was happening in my life. And when he showed up at my apartment down on the main floor, like these huge doors, and you have to have a code to ring in, he called me, and I wouldn't give him the code at first, but then he had the code, and then you have to go up 5 flights of stairs. There's no elevator. You have to go up 5 flights of stairs. Then there's another door that you have to go through that I had gone and unlocked. So you went through that door, and then there's like an external hallway. And then you come to my apartment, and which has like a door had a window on it. I was sitting in the living room, and he was just standing. I had the window open. He's just standing there. He's like, "Will you let me in?" And I kind of sat there for a minute. And he's like, "Are you going to let me in?" And I'm like, "Maybe." So I ran over and I unlocked the door.
Internal battle. Like I want to, I don't want to.
Yeah. But I like ran over and I like opened the door, and then I went back to the couch, and I pulled this blanket over me because it felt protective, and it was like sweltering. It was late June in Paris, and it was hot. And I could tell like he wanted to hug me or something. And I did not want him to touch me. I felt like he was like contaminated and dirty and gross, and I didn't want him to touch me at all. But, we started talking, and I felt like he was still making excuses. And so I was like pushing back. At that point, I was so mad. I didn't care if I upset him anymore. Like I was like just pushing back on everything. I demanded that he give me his phone. I went through his phone. Like I read all these messages between him and his girlfriend. I found like a secret blog that he had. Like I found all this stuff. And I just sat down there and just started confronting him on everything. And the conclusion that I came to eventually, not right away, was that this woman didn't know him before his accident. And everybody that did know him before the accident was starting to question if he was okay. She was telling him in the messages that I read that we were all wrong. There was nothing wrong with him, that it was specifically all in my head, and that I was trying to make him look bad, that he was a fantastic father and all this stuff, and that it was all me. And I think he so wanted to feel normal that it was easy for him to believe that the problem laid with me and not with what he was doing.
Yeah.
So that's what I worked out eventually, but it was hard.
Yeah. And what did you think when you came to that conclusion?
It didn't make it better.
Yeah.
It
I'm
didn't
like, it's
make
not
it.
solving anything. How
No,
do you like
I
actually
mean,
go and deal with it?
yeah, no, I mean, he still did what he did and he knew it was wrong, but seeing the communication between the two of them, I really felt like he had been manipulated in a lot of ways. So she would say things like in the later letters, like it was very clear that he was trying to end things with her. And she would say, "You can't break up with me because I will tell your wife." And actually, I'm an author and I had a book signing in Chicago right before I found out about the affair. And she flew from New York and showed up at it, took pictures with me and sent them to him and said, "Look, I can see your wife whenever I want to." It was a little crazy, but I found all this stuff as I was going through his phone. So there was definitely like a sense of he was worried if he ended, I would find out. And he didn't want me to know. So he was like kind of like this weird, he was like living two lives.
Yeah.
You know, on one hand, he was talking about how he was going to marry her and they were going to have kids together and have this cute little apartment in New York. He had a vasectomy. There was no way he was having kids with her.
Right.
It's not going to happen. And then meanwhile, like I'm trying to hold our family together. And he's telling me that he doesn't know if there's a future for us, that he sometimes feels glimmers and sparkles of love for me, but he doesn't love himself. And so he doesn't know if he can love anybody else. So I'm trying to mesh these two different people together and try to figure out like, not only who was he during this period of time, but the husband I knew before his accident, with the husband right after his accident, with my affair husband, with the person who he was now after his affair. And it was a lot.
Yeah. 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 So that was Paris. You stayed there for a month together. I mean, he came later, but
Oh no, we stayed there for a long time.
Just the two of you, your kids came or?
Yeah, we actually stayed until August without our kids. And then my kids came over and we stayed for a couple more months.
That wasn't nice. Like, would you want to live there?
Yeah, I mean, we loved it. And actually what happened, we were going to try to stay longer, but I had become an illegal immigrant at that point in time because my visa had, I had overstayed the legal visa and I would have to go back into the US and try to come back. So I didn't want to go back to San Francisco. I was so embarrassed because the day that I found out about his affair, he actually put it up on Facebook, a big apology letter apologizing to me and everybody else that he had hurt. And he admitted that he had an affair. So everybody in my world knew.
It's like public knowledge.
Yes. And that's part of the reason why I left for Paris, because I was so humiliated. So I knew I didn't want to go back to San Francisco. So we just Googled like best places to live in America. And this town in Northern Virginia came up. So when we left Paris, we had a 4-day layover in Northern Virginia. We found a house. He found a job. Oh yeah, because I made him quit his job also. So first I got him a leave of absence. Like I called his HR person and I said, "Hey, you remember his accident? He never took any time off and he's dealing with like some brain injury stuff. He's supposed to go on a trip to New York next week. Can we get him off that? And he needs a 90-day leave of absence." So they gave him a 90-day leave of absence.
So that's when he came to like when he was in Paris. This
was right before he came to Paris. I did this.
Okay.
And so, I mean, he was not happy with me, but and then when he got to Paris, like there was a lot of stuff that was going on with his job. So he basically quit his job so we could focus. So we had no job. We were living off of the lawsuit money, running around Paris.
And you still have to pay for the medical bills, right?
Yeah. But I mean, the lawsuit was pretty substantial. So there was a lot of money left over. So we were running around Paris and we were running around Europe. And then we moved to we picked out a house in Northern Virginia. We flew home, we packed up our San Francisco house and then in 3 weeks and drove across country. And so it was like in 1 month, we went from being in Paris to San Francisco to Virginia. It was crazy. And that was all my doing. And that was kind of a sign. It should have been a sign that something wasn't right with me, but we didn't recognize it at the time. But what I was doing was I was basically isolating myself. I had stopped taking phone calls and messages from any of my friends or family. I totally cut myself off from my San Francisco life and all my San Francisco friends. And I took my family and I plopped them down basically in the middle of nowhere in Northern Virginia and was just like, deal with it. Like we're going to have a new life.
Yeah. Like as if, and problems are going to all be gone and every life will be perfect. So how did you get help? At what point did you realize things need to change and you need to do something about this?
So I actually had a therapist in Paris. She originally started out like as a marriage therapist for both my husband and me together. And then she decided that after like 2 visits that she really needed to see me on my own because I had a lot of stuff that I needed to unpack. And then she was fantastic. I loved her. But when we came to Virginia, I didn't have any therapy. I didn't have anyone. I thought I was okay. I was like excited about this new life and all this stuff.
Did she know about this move, like that you were going in the middle of nowhere and like cutting everyone else off and tried to stop you from doing it? Or, I mean,
No.
not her job to try to stop you, but like try to bring some light on what you were doing, or she didn't know about it?
I didn't know we were leaving Paris until the day before we left.
Okay.
So my husband had arranged for us to leave because he knew that I would not have gone. So I actually didn't know that we were going until the day before. And I just kind of resigned myself to it. I was just like, okay. At that point, I was so numb. I was just doing whatever he told me to do. I couldn't make decisions. I had, later on, but I had started, like, I was depressed. I was like severely depressed, and I just couldn't think. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't really engage with my children. It was a mess. But when we got to Northern Virginia, he looked for a marriage counselor for us. And the first one that he found was this older man, and he took us, we did like the intake questionnaire, and then he met with us. And then he said there was nothing he could do for us, that he couldn't help us.
Really?
Yeah. And so like,
I'm like, maybe it's better he said that right away before he started working with you, and then it messed you guys up even more, because if that's his mindset.
Right. So I was kind of like, all right, well, we're unfixable. Like, and my husband's like, we're not unfixable. I'll find someone else. But he didn't find anyone else. And I was miserable. I'd never lived in a suburb before. I didn't have a car. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't walk anywhere. So I just kind of sat in my house by myself all day long while he went to work.
Isolating yourself even more. Did you have a job at that point?
I'm an author. So, but I wasn't able to actually write. I couldn't work. I couldn't focus. I had no focus. All I would do is sit and cry and stare at the walls and just be numb. And I tried meeting people. Like, I had been like the PTO president at our school before. And so like I joined the PTA, and I like tried to do activities, and there's like this big carnival that I volunteered for, but nobody spoke to me. And I just kept feeling lonelier and lonelier. And then his parents came to visit us in April. Actually, no, in January, his uncle died. So we went back to San Francisco. And when we were there, I realized that I made a huge mistake moving us to Virginia. But we had to come back, and my kids loved it here. My husband's like, we're not leaving Virginia. This is like perfect for the boys. They love it. They're making friends. The public schools are fantastic, and blah, 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 blah. And then his parents came in April. And when they were here in April, I should back up a little bit. When we were in Paris, I started cutting myself as a way, like I've never done that before, but I started cutting myself as a way to like kind of get a handle of my emotions.
Yeah.
And it escalated. So when his parents came, and I also, if you remember the lorazepam that my doctor had given me, my husband was flying back and forth between San Francisco, Michigan, and Paris all summer to see our kids. And he would go pick up more pills for me. And I would call my doctor and say, lorazepam's not working. What else can you give me? But what I was doing was I was taking fistfuls of lorazepam, Klonopin, all this other stuff, and drinking bottles and bottles of champagne. I had never drank. I was not a drinker before this. So I started drinking like tons of champagne and taking tons of pills, and I was a mess. So fast forward to April, his parents came to visit, and I was like, we had a really nice day. We went out, we took pictures in the cherry blossoms, and we did all this. And his aunt was here too. We came home, and we were sitting out on the deck, and I told his mom and his aunt that I wanted to divorce him. I didn't see that there was any way forward for us, and I wanted a divorce. And his mom was like, his mom and I are very close. And she asked me like how long I'd been thinking about it, and that they would support me no matter what I wanted to do, because this was a horrible situation, and they just wanted what was best for the kids and me and everything. And then I went upstairs and I slit my wrists. I just couldn't deal. And I came downstairs, and I was like bleeding everywhere. And my husband's like, did you do that to yourself? I'm like, yeah, I think I hurt myself pretty badly. And then my mother-in-law saw what was happening, and she was like, this is not normal. You need to get her therapy.
Yeah.
And I got myself he got me a therapist like pretty much the next day. And then I was eventually diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. That was, I guess, situational. So like sometimes when you have a crisis or something traumatic happen to you, if you have a predisposition to bipolar 2 disorder, it can kick it on. So if this hadn't happened, I might not have never known that. But because I had basically suffered first thinking my husband was dead, then his erratic behavior for months and months and months, and then the shock of his affair, it was just too much for my body to handle. And I shut down.
Yeah. Now that therapist, like you've been seeing ever since, like she helped you, how like still go see her, and you like her different ones since then, or what?
No, I still see her. So I have a psychiatrist. I have a whole team. I have a psychiatrist, a therapist. Like I have a whole team.
Support people, guys. You see, you need every single one of them.
Yes. Lots of support people. And like, originally I was taking just tons and tons of medication to calm my brain down. And like I was taking lithium and like all kinds of stuff. And now I just take 2 very small dosages of pills a day. Like I take barely anything. I've learned coping mechanisms. I could do a lot of yoga. I do a lot of Pelotoning. I make sure I get sleep and eat. Like if I don't sleep and eat right, like I start to spiral. But, my husband was on the separate path. Like he was having his own therapy during this time to deal with all of his like brain injuries and stuff. And watching him get better gave me the encouragement that I could get better. And he was really, so our roles kind of switched because he really became like my caretaker in a lot of ways. So making sure that I took my pills and.
Yeah. So how has your relationship now, like, okay, so we heard what your relationship was like in the beginning and when it was after the accident and in Paris. And now at this point, when things are going so much better, you're both getting the help you need. You both have tons of support. What's it like?
Oh, we're great. It's great. I would say it's actually better than it was before his accident.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, he's my best friend. We have a lot of fun together. One of my sons is in college now. My other son is going off to college in the fall. And I have my youngest is home. He's in 8th grade. So he'll be, so like our kids are leaving us, but there's no one that I like hanging out with more than my husband. Like we have so much fun. We have so much fun together. And like we basically grew up together, and yes, we went through hell, but we had people, we had our parents. And I'm a really big believer in being honest and open about like what you're going through, because that's the only way that we were able to get through this. Once I started talking about my issues with like what was going on with my husband, and once he was able to say out loud, this is my problem, he was able to get the help that he needed. When I started talking about his affair, when I started talking about my struggles with my pills and my drinking and my bipolar disorder and being public about it, I started to get so much more support. And so now I know that when I am having a bad day or a bad spell, if I just tell my friends, I'm like, look, I don't want to do anything. I'm finding myself isolating again. I'm doing this, this, and this. They're on me. They're like, over here, what can we do? Like people will bring food. They'll come over. They'll sit with me. It's really important to have a network. And I also think, the more we talk about it, the more we destigmatize it. So, I mean, destigmatizing affairs, because I think that there's this misconception with affairs, I think, that someone is to blame, right? Like it's your fault, And I, oh, the wife was frigid or the husband's a horn dog or, vice versa or whatever. There's usually something deeper underlying that lies with both
usually
parties.
Always.
Yes. Both parties. And it's really hard to look at yourself and say, like, this was my role and this is what I did and this is what I can do differently. It's really hard to accept that personal responsibility, especially when you're the person who's been wronged, right? Because like, I'm the victim. Like, how did I do anything wrong? Like, I didn't tell them to go have an affair. I didn't, there's usually something there that you can work on also. And I'm not saying like bend over and do whatever your spouse tells you. Like,
yeah, like not in an unhealthy, codependent, like stepping over your boundaries type of way.
But just like really examine like who you are and like what your goals are. Like maybe you guys have gotten off track with your life goals. Like maybe that's the issue. You started out like this and now you've gone like that. And like, how do you get it back to start? Because I'm a big believer, like when you are both working towards the same things, your marriage is going to be a lot happier when you're both on the same page.
Yes, totally. Yeah, exactly. Now, what do you think was like the biggest thing you learned from this whole situation? Obviously, there were like so many lessons, every aspect you could learn from it. But if you had to like pick the number one, what would you say that is?
Really loving myself. I mean, to be honest, just loving myself. Like I feel like through the whole process, I've learned to do that. I was very type A before my husband's accident, and I carried over like after his accident trying to be type A, but I lost myself. Like after I had my kids, I was mom and I was like, wife and mom. And I always said that my first priority was to be a good wife, because if I had a healthy marriage, my kids would be strong. Everything would flow down from having a healthy marriage. As opposed to like, I know a lot of people say put the kids first, but I really think you need to put your marriage first, because I do think a strong marriage makes strong families, make strong kids. But I had lost my sense of love for myself during that process. I lost it, like, especially during his affair and after his affair. I just kind of forgot who I was and who I could be. So I needed to learn to love myself, but also appreciate the things that I can do in that moment. Like, I'm not always Superwoman. And sometimes, getting out of bed can be hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're overwhelmed, just getting out of bed, but giving myself grace, like learning to give myself grace and be okay with where I am in that moment.
Totally starts with you. And when you could do that with yourself, then you could do that with your partner and with your kids and everyone else in this world. So
Yeah.
literally everything starts with yourself. So loving yourself is such a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So for our final question, one that I ask everyone, how do you describe an extraordinary relationship without using love, connection, and honesty?
Laughter. Like, you have to be able to laugh and appreciate and enjoy the person that you're with.
Yeah. That's probably what was the hardest part of after the accident. Like when he had this outburst, because like you mentioned in the beginning, he made you laugh tons and you had so much fun together. And it sounds like you have that now. So I'm glad.
Yeah. We found it again. We found a way to enjoy and appreciate each other again.
I'm so happy for you. I know this was crazy challenging. And no, I do not wish on anyone that their husband or their wife goes and has a truck accident, but you really pulled out of this so well. And it really sounds like your marriage is so much better. So thank you so much for sharing this with us and appreciate this.
Well, thank you for having me.
That's all for this episode of Life Picks Relationships, and we have a huge favor to ask of you that will not only support this show, but also give others what they need to take their marriage to the next level. We're striving to have 1 million downloads per episode by December 31st, 2025, so please share it with your family and friends so they can turn their relationship into an extraordinary one.